Hello everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome back to ROM Storytime. Now you may have noticed I am wearing my Happy Sugar Skulls dress today, and I really like this dress because it takes something that a lot of people think are kind of spooky like skulls, but makes them really fun and interesting and fun to look at. And I'm wearing it because it reminded me a little bit of our story this week. It's a story that's slightly spooky, but it's so much fun to listen to. So our story this week is The First Mosquito. It's written and illustrated by Caroll Simpson, and this version of it is written and illustrated by Caroll Simpson because The First Mosquito is a version of a story shared by lots of Indigenous nations on the Pacific Northwest coast. And if you want to know what I am talking about, there is our map of Turtle Island, which you may know is North America. And the little star is where I am reading you the story today, and the big circle is the Pacific Northwest coast. Now, stories like this one are told aloud to help guide people listening to the story, like all of you today, toward knowledge that they can discover from nature, and help us figure out how to live our lives in a good way. And one of the things that makes them special is that they're not going to straight up tell you what you're supposed to learn from the story. It's up to you to make your own meaning. And I want to say a special thanks to Heritage House Publishers for letting us read this version of the story to you today. Hey everybody! Sorry to interrupt. It is Sarah from the future with an important message for you. Now, unfortunately, after the 2020 school year ends, we can't keep the read aloud portion of the Storytime in the Storytime broadcast, but don't worry, I've got something special for you. Now, in the meantime, we do encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. You can sign it out of your library. Get your grown-ups help to share your thoughts with us at ROM Toronto, #ROM@home, because we would love to hear what you think of this book. But in the meantime, here is Sarah's Superfast Storytime summary.
Okay, so, in the Northwest, when the world was new, there were these kids, Yaks and his sister Sook, and they listened to the elders tell stories of the mythical creatures who helped the world be what it is. So one day, Yaks was practicing with his spear and lost it in the woods, and it got all quiet because Creek Woman silenced the frogs, and Yaks wandered deeper into the quiet woods after his spear and got lost. And then at night, Yaks' mother got a visit from Mouse Woman who told her to beware the blood-sucking monster. And then Mouse Woman told Sook that the wild man of the woods loves cockles, which are a kind of clam. So Mom got real mad and ran out and was all, "Hey, you stupid storm, what did you do with my son?" And the wind told her, "He's lost." And Mom was sure blood-sucking monster took him, and she was all, "That's it," and went to go build a giant fire on the beach and brought Sook with her and was like, "Hey, here's this awesome fire and my sweet kid. It would be a shame if any monsters came this way." And then she hid behind a rock. So Sook remembered what Mouse Woman said and left some cockles on the path and asked Thunderbird to send some lightning snakes to show Yaks where they were. And it totally worked. So Yaks ran toward the light, but he heard this noise behind him, and the wild man of the woods was following him. But then the wild man was all like, "Oh sweet, cockles," and stopped to eat them. So Yaks kept running, and now blood-sucking monster, who'd been hiding in the woods and watching, jumped over wild man and ran over to eat the kids. But Mom was all like, "Take that, you darn monster!" and jumped out from behind the rock and pushed him into the fire, and the blood-sucking monster exploded into black ash. And when the black ash fell, it became mosquitoes, who are still trying to suck our blood today.
So I hope that you enjoyed the story this week. And right now is the time where we start to get to our questions. So as I mentioned before, we have a special guest in the chat with us today. My friend J'net AyayQwaYakSheelth is joining us. She's the museum's Indigenous Outreach Coordinator, and she comes from the Nechanof Nation, and she knows her family's versions of this story really well. Because remember I said there's actually lots of different versions of them. So today we're going to do something that we do a lot at the museum, and we're going to work together, me and J'net, to answer your questions. So I can take any questions you have about mosquitoes or blood feeders, because I'm really comfortable with those ones, and she's going to help me out if you have questions about the story or the creatures in it. And while you are, thanks Giovanna, while you are putting your questions into the chat, let's take a look at this week's Creativity Challenge.
The First Mosquito is a story shared by several Indigenous nations on the Pacific Northwest coast. Stories like this one are told aloud to guide the listener toward knowledge they can discover from nature and help us figure out how to live our lives in a good way. In the Bloodsuckers, Legends to Leeches exhibition at the ROM, we learned that blood-feeding creatures have inspired stories throughout history and around the world for as long as people have been around to tell stories. Some stories are stories that inspire learning and understanding like this one, and others are purely for entertainment. For example, a character like Leech from the He-Man cartoons doesn't have a lot of lessons to teach, but he certainly is fun to watch. For our creativity challenge this week, find a blood-feeding creature that inspires you. Blood feeding can be found in many diverse groups of animals, from bugs to snails to birds and even mammals. Use books, the internet, or knowledge keepers in your family or community to learn more about it. Then, either tell a story inspired by that creature that explores what we can learn from nature, like the story we read this week, or design a creature inspired by your blood feeder, like Dracula or Leech. Share your stories or creatures with us at ROM Toronto, #ROM@home.
All right, so this week you are challenged to take inspiration from bloodsuckers and create your own stories or creatures from them. So if you want to see that again at this side, this is rom.on.ca/storytime. You can get the creativity challenge in the next day or two. That page will go up. And I really encourage you to go this week because as well on that page this week for this week's story, we have Taya Winddancer, who is going to be telling her version of this story as well. And it's different from the one that we just heard. So it's a really great example about how these stories change depending on who's telling them and over time and in different places. All right. So you can tell a story for the creativity challenge this week. You can create your creature like I did. I was inspired by the vampire snail because I just think those are really cool. And you can send your creativity challenge examples. You can either tell your story or send us your creature to @RomToronto, #ROM@home on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. All right, so now we have lots of great questions in the chat. So I'm going to start from the top. Lillian would like to know what cockles are. Cockles are a mollusk, kind of like a clam. They have two shells that can kind of open up, and the meat of the animal is inside those two shells. And J'net wants to know how dangerous mosquitoes can be to humans, and the answer is, depending on where you are, vary. A lot of people went to the Bloodsuckers exhibition and were like, ooh, lampreys, ooh, vampire bats, mosquitoes. But mosquitoes can actually cause more damage and more harm than anything else. But there are things that we can do to protect ourselves from them as well. Skits has a question about bloodsuckers. Do all mosquitoes suck blood? And the answer is no. So there are about 3,500 species of mosquito in the world. There's about 82 of them in Canada. Only a couple hundred mosquito species actually bother people, but most of the time mosquitoes are nectar feeders. They drink nectar from flowers and they can pollinate flowers just like bees. But female mosquitoes don't have enough iron or protein in their body to make eggs. So only female mosquitoes, not the males, and only when they're ready to make eggs, those are the mosquitoes that feed on blood. The rest of the time, they feed on nectar from flowers. Oh, so many questions today. Man. Caitlin would like to know why mosquitoes eat blood. So I went over that. And why only the mummy mosquitoes. So I went over that. And what do the dad mosquitoes eat? I went over that too. So just to reiterate, so the mummy mosquitoes are the only ones that eat blood because they don't have the stuff in their bodies, the protein and the iron to make the eggs. And the rest of the time, they and the daddy mosquitoes, they are drinking nectar from flowers. And Giovanna has asked J'net if her family's version is different from this one. And again, if you go to rom.on.ca/storytime in the next day or two, you can actually hear her daughter's version of this story. And yeah, J'net says, for those who are following along, my daughter shares our family's version. I shared throughout their lives. Even my 26-year-old adult son, Ocean, remembers the story, and it still scares him. And Harley would like to know how people can tell the friendly monsters from the bad monsters, as they all look a bit scary. And I'm going to let J'net field that one. And while J'net is answering that one, how to tell the friendly monsters from the bad monsters, because they all look a bit scary, I'm going to offer one of my opinions too, is that whenever you're out in nature, if you don't know something really, really well, the best thing to do is to show it healthy respect and leave it alone. It is a really great version of the story that Taya tells, and I really encourage everybody to go and see it. All right. Okay, good question, Skits. Why do mosquito bites itch? And Anya says hi. Hi, Anya. So mosquito bites itch because once blood feeders get at the blood, our bodies immediately want to stop it. And that makes sense, right? Because blood stays inside your body. It's not very useful if it's outside your body. So your body goes, hey, stop that. And the blood clots. And that's no good for blood feeders, because it's like if you're drinking something through a straw and there's a clog in the straw and you can't get anything else. So what blood feeders do is there are chemicals in their spit, and it's a really big word. They're called anticoagulants. But what that big word means is they stop blood from clotting. And there's different kinds of chemicals depending on the species of animal. My favorite one is the one that vampire bats have. The anticoagulant in bat spit is called Draculin, which is just my favorite thing. But that anticoagulant people react to. So depending on how allergic you are to that chemical in their spit that's stopping your blood from clotting, that determines how itchy you are. So mosquito bites itch because mosquito spit has stuff that you're kind of allergic to in it. J'net is typing as fast as she can. But the roles each creature plays teach us a lesson about how to know and respect the natural world. Are there mosquitoes in other parts of the world? Oh, yes. So there are mosquitoes in other parts of the world for sure. As I mentioned, there are 3,500 more or less different species across the world. Only 82 of those are in Canada. And they will absolutely have their own stories about them. There are stories from around the world for pretty much as long as people have been telling stories about things that feed on blood, because they are some of the species that interact the most closely with humans. And the more closely things interact with humans, the more likely there is to be a story about them. Lotto has a question. Can mosquitoes bite through clothes? That is a good question, and that depends on the kind of clothes you're wearing. So I'm going to pull up. So obviously we picked the story because of the Bloodsuckers exhibition, and this is a picture of one of my favorite things in the Bloodsuckers exhibition, which is a giant model of a mosquito head. They do not get this big. That would be a very scary mosquito, but that is what they look like. And so you can see they've got the antenna, and the antenna are really good for detecting humidity and heat for things that are really close by them. For things that are farther away, you can see they've got these little kind of things on either side. Those are the palps, and those have sensors in them that can detect the chemicals in your breath and in your skin. So when they're further away, up to about 35 meters, they can follow the chemicals in your breath with those palps. And then the big part is the proboscis, that thing coming down. And it's like, you know how swords have a sheath? Well, it's got a sheath, and instead of one sword inside, it's got 6 kind of teeny little needles. And those are the things that actually go directly into the blood vessel so that they can feed. So their strategy is a bit different from something like a black fly. Black flies make a big hole and the blood comes up to them. Mosquitoes make a teeny little needle hole, and the proboscis goes down to it. So if your clothing is really loose, they'll be able to get the proboscis right through it. But if you've got some thicker clothing, then that will actually protect you. And if you remember the first story that we read, Black Flies, at the very end, after the family gets carried away by the thousands of black flies and mosquitoes, they go back out again in their mosquito clothes. There we go. So that they can enjoy the forest respectfully and the mosquitoes and the black flies don't bother them. So J'net has some more answers for those who are following along. The creatures may be new to listeners who are hearing this kind of story and seem all scary, but many West Coast Indigenous children may know these characters by many different names. And J'net wants to know about natural mosquito repellent. So in the Bloodsuckers exhibition, there was actually a whole section where they tested out different kinds of mosquito repellent to see what worked and what didn't. So clothes are a really good one, like the family in Black Flies wear at the end of the book. Other things that work really, really well are bug sprays with DEET and Icardin in them. They work really well for a really long time. Bug sprays with lemon or eucalyptus oil work, but only for about 2 hours and then they wear off. And then there are things that kind of work depending on the situation that you're in. So essential oils don't really work so great. They evaporate really fast. Things like you can get wristbands and little patches. They work right in the area of those things. So a wristband bug repellent will protect your wrist from mosquitoes, but not the rest of your body. Citronella candles and things like that protect the immediate vicinity, and they tend to not work if there's wind. And some of the indigenous solutions in there are things like pineapple weed and sweetgrass. And they actually do have chemicals in them that deter biting insects. But like a lot of the other things, it depends on how much of it is around you, how close you are to it, and how much wind there is dispersing it. Because as soon as it disperses, and the mosquitoes are getting those great chemical signals from your skin and from your breath, that's what they're zooming in on. And things that don't work, things like sonic pest repellents. This is my favorite one. People try to sell you things and say, oh, this noise will get mosquitoes and biting flies away. But the female biting flies, the ones that need that blood to make their eggs, are almost completely deaf. They don't hear the sonic noise, so they're sending you a really expensive, useless noisemaker. Skin patches with vitamin B, there is no evidence that those work. A lot of people talk about garlic and bananas. They will keep people away, especially the garlic, but not so much bugs. And a lot of people really like bug zappers. And bug zappers may get 1 or 2 mosquitoes, but they're mostly killing other useful insects that are around and not so much the mosquitoes. Can mosquitoes eat human food? They probably can. So just like bees sometimes eat sugar water because it's like the nectar they get from flowers, anything kind of sweet mosquitoes might like if they're on that nectar feeding phase of their life. Garlic definitely keeps skits away for sure. But mosquitoes are not so much interested in your chips or your hamburger. You know, they want nectar if it's that time of their life, and if females are trying to have eggs, they want blood, and that's pretty much it. All right, so let's see if there are any other questions. If not, I want to thank you for joining me again this week, and thank J'net so much. Oh, before we go, positive things mosquitoes can do. Great question, Joanna. Mosquitoes, so like we saw in the storybook, we saw bat eating mosquito. And this is one of the things I love about bats. In Ontario, one of our little brown bats can eat 1,000 mosquitoes a night. So they are really, really useful. But mosquitoes form a really, really important part in the food chain. They are a food source for many, many other things in the environment. And for aquatic organisms as well. So one of the things you can do to protect yourself from mosquitoes if you don't want them around their house is get rid of standing water. Because mosquitoes lay their eggs in still water. And that can be a big still pond, or it can be like I have a watering can out on my deck that fills up with rain and I have to dump it out on the flowers. I can't let the water sit there. Even a spoonful of water in the trunk of a tree is enough for mosquitoes to raise their babies in there. But mosquito babies in aquatic environments are also a really important part of those aquatic ecosystems, and they're food for a lot of other things like dragonflies. Why do mosquitoes bite some people more than others? They're still looking into it, but it is actually true that mosquitoes do prefer some people more than others, and that just has to do with the smells that you're putting off. So I'm not sure if it's different blood types or what it is, but something about you smells more appetizing to those mosquitoes. But they definitely do have preferences. That is true. Yep, this is the time of year where the mosquitoes are going to be coming out, so it's a good idea to stay inside at night for sure. All right. So if there are no more questions, I will keep an eye on the chat just in case they come up. Again, if you have questions later that you're like, I wish I had asked that question, you can always ask them to ROM at home at ROM Toronto. It's definitely a fast typing environment. But I hope you join me next week, because next week we are voyaging into the 100-acre wood to meet some of the friends that I had growing up. How long does it take for mosquito eggs to hatch? That is a good question that I have to look up because I cannot remember off the top of my head. It is not very long. Their aquatic life cycle is very short, which is why they can breed in puddles before they dry up. All right. So thank you so much, everybody. And as always, take care of each other, keep reading, and I will see you next Tuesday.